Okay, welcome back everyone. It is my great privilege to introduce my dear colleague, Professor Sven Ahlbäck. Sven is a fiddle player and professor in Swedish folk music at the Royal College of Music in Stockholm. And he has pioneered and championed folk music as an academic discipline, as well as an art form here in Sweden and internationally. And his research has had an impact on how Swedish folk music is performed today. He's also a founder of DoReMIR, for example, working with transcriptions of sung melodies into score representations. And he will talk today on the problems of ground truth in music and the power of concepts. So Sven, thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you very much. As Matthias mentioned, I'm a fiddle player, but I also have a PhD in musicology and a professor at the Royal College of Music here in Stockholm. I've also spent a lot of time over the last 30 years or so on trying to model music cognition with computers, which eventually led me to start the software company DoReMIR Music Research. And in this talk, I will tell you about some of my experiences I have from modeling how people experience music structure, how I approach this problem, and also discuss a bit regarding the consequences and problems we face in music modeling. We'll start very generally. It goes without saying, but it's still remarkable, I think. We've seen a revolution in music technology over the last decades, both with regards to tools for music creation and distribution of music. With mobile devices and streaming services, we have instant access to more produced music than ever before, and thanks to the accessibility of music recording and production, more music is published than ever before. This change in the production accessibility of music in our society is profound and has been so rapid it's even hard to encompass. But speaking about this, is music today more diverse, varied and creative than before? In some respects the answer is probably yes, but looking at some fundamental aspects of human music expressivity, you can but wonder about the limitations for music creativity today. For instance, 100% of the loops in Apple GarageBand are in 4/4 time. 4 basic chord progressions did account for more than 90% of the Billboard Top 40 2018. Tempo change and many aspects of pitch deviation is almost extinct in the most streamed music today. And this actually excludes a major part of the diversity in musical expression in human performed music around the world. So these limitations in musical expression we hear today is hardly the result of a decision by a board, for instance, at Apple or Spotify, that they have discussed the general ban on music that is not in 4/4. Rather, it's probably driven by popularity and limitations of music production technology. For example, if you are to synchronize different performance individual recordings in a multi-track recording, it's easier if the tempo does not shift. And if 90% of Western popular music is in 4/4 time, why bother with other time signatures? Rather, I would argue that music technology, like music instruments, reflect ideas about how music works, what we normally call music theory. The same is true for developing musical AI. What data, what music we do select for training our models and how models are evaluated reflects ideas about music. I would also argue that the properties of datasets is increasingly important for the development of music technology, and what is defined as ground truth in developing models of music becomes important, and it's not always trivial to define. And I'd like to start this now by showing a presentation here, so if I can sharing my screen and then start playing this presentation. I would like to involve you in an experiment, or at least tell you about an experiment. You will hear 3 versions of the same melody, and I want you to judge which version is right. Please wait till you have heard all 3 versions of the melody. Just let's listen first. Here's number 1. And here's number 2. Well, let's see. So. And here's number 3. And I will try and share again my screen here, because I think I made a mistake with my screen sharing. So let's share again. Desktop 2, I think. Just share. So let's see if I can get it rolling. Yes. Do you see, Matthias? Can you see which version is right? This image. Okay. Can you see it? This image. Just.
The image did show, yes.
Yeah, the image did show. Okay, thank you.
Well, the numbers though.
Yeah, the numbers 1, 2, 3. So, so how many things? Example, 1 was right, 2 or 3. Well, obviously, there are different opinions. There can be different opinions regarding this question. I asked 25 musicians about this. And I got actually all 3 versions as answers of what version was the right one. Actually, all versions are identical except for the position of the downbeat in the melody, the beat where you feel the measure begins, the 1. So what is the ground truth on the downbeat for this melody? Actually, the question is wrong. There is no right or wrong version. Turns out all 3 versions are viable and exist in music in our culture. And which one we prefer depends on many factors, such as the listener's cultural context, personal preferences and experiences of music, but also, for example, the order of presentation of the stimuli. If we include enough listeners, right alternative is a matter of preference, even though some listeners obviously feel strongly about right or wrong. The ground truth is relative in this case. But what's the issue? Isn't this just a matter of taste? Where the question actually relates to the fundamental human ability, namely the ability to synchronize actions with periodicity in music, in particular synchronizing actions with the musical pulse. This is an ability that distinguishes us from almost every other species on the planet. And it's useful for us in a great number of situations and has been essential throughout human history. In rituals and ceremonies, we act in synchronous motion. We have been able to be more powerful in acting synchronous in joint labor and military action. When we dance together or play or sing together, we act like one body, which creates social bonding. In fact, it has been shown in recent experiments where babies learned how to bounce along with music, that the common metrical perception is essential to social bonding. When babies and adults bounced in synchronicity, babies became more emphatic and helpful. In all these actions, music is the unifying factor. If we are dancing together, marching together, walk towards the altar together, when we marry, it's important that we can interpret the periodicity in music similarly. For example, when you dance the wedding waltz, it becomes easier if you and your partner have similar experience of the downbeat. If you recall this initial melody, it might be good to marry someone who agrees with you on where to put the downbeat. Otherwise, you might need to take an online tutorial. The ground truth on where to put the downbeat is of course crucial when you notate a piece of music. And this is precisely what the software Score Cloud we develop at my company aims at doing automatically. So let me show you a short video commercial of our iPhone app that we did for some years ago.
Inspiration can surprise you because great ideas just happen. Score Cloud Express lets you capture musical ideas in the moment. It's the only mobile app that can translate a recording into a musical score. Just press record and start singing, playing, or humming. Its unique technology, developed from years of research, means it can understand and translate your rhythms and melodies into sheet music. It even syncs through the cloud, so later you can take the idea further, or easily pass the music on to that friend, the great cello player. Score Cloud Express.
So, what have we learned from this? How does the algorithm we used in ScoreCloud derives from research that began about 30 years ago, long before modern machine learning techniques were developed and long before today's accessibility of high-performance computing power. So how does ScoreCloud work? As a musician, I've always been interested in how music communicates on a basic level, and the focus of my doctoral work became to try and model cognition of basic musical structure. Music exists in all cultures, and there is a long-time debate on to what extent music is a universal language of mankind, and to what extent it's a culture-specific phenomenon. The fundamental questions of my research was how similarly we experience basic music structure over cultural boundaries, and to what extent it's possible to model music cognition from perceptual and cognitive capacities we all share. So I went to cognitive psychology for finding a basis for the model, and had also to make a lot of listener experiments myself. From this evidence, I developed a model which was based on a limited number of assumptions of how music information structuring works. The basis of this model is the assumption that structuring is a spontaneous process which is driven by a need to reduce information processing by generalizing, categorizing and simplifying cognitive economy. I also assume that we seek coherence in structure and prioritize information which is meaningful within the context. Also assume that structuring is dependent on our capacities with regard to information processing. The central concept here is that information is processed in temporal chunks, nows, relating to the capacity of short-term memory processing. The idea of a perceptual now emerged from research on rhythm perception already in the 1950s. Similarly, studies also dating back to the 1950s indicated that there is a limited number of categories that we can handle simultaneously, what I call the categorical now. Moreover, there seem to be limitations to our ability to instantly grasp and categorize proportions between objects, according to studies in perceptual processing, which indicates that we can perceive up to fourfoldiness as a whole, while we typically process more complex patterns in groups of twos and threes. For example, when we process a series of numbers, we tend to group them into chunks of a few numbers at a time. Yet another set of principles relate to how structure is formed. How does something become something? Gestalt psychology demonstrated already in the 1920s and 30s that two complementary principles form basic structuring, structuring by similarity and difference. In the case of temporal structure, it implies that we can get something happens, for example, due to recurrence, something becomes something because it's repeated, and inversely, something becomes something because of a change in the temporal stream. In musical terms, it means that if a sequence of intervals between notes is repeated, a structure might be perceived, and the structure might be formed by disruption of the flow events by, for instance, rests and long notes. A secondary set of principles relates to coherence and intelligibility. The continuity principle implies that if something is repeated, we assume it will continue. The symmetry principle implies that similar substructuring will be anticipated to continue. And a third set of principles relate to the prominence of structures. Perceptually prominent events tend to influence structuring, while structures that are discrete from each other, that has inner contrast, are easier to recognize than structures that can be mixed up with each other. Also, perception and cognition of music happens in time. The model assumes that when we start listening to music, we have already preconceptions about music structure influenced by previous experience, culturally or socially determined, even state of mind, situation. For example, if we are to dance the wedding waltz, our experience of waltzing in the situation that we are going to dance will influence our cognition. Once we start to listen, we start processing what we hear within the limitations of the perception now. The structuring according to the features described earlier takes place. The perception of local structure forms an expectation of the general structure of the music, which is governed by secondary and tertiary grouping principles as well as matching with learned patterns, which in turn creates updated expectations that creates a bias when cognizing local structures and so on. Important that this is a recurrent process, which means we're constantly updating a general view of the music, even in retrospect. And actually this process continues also after we stopped listening to the music. A typical example of this is how a song we heard on the radio or Eurovision Song Contest previous night suddenly pops up in our head the next day. We can look at this as process as a play with expectations. And it's important to realize the degree of our ability to reinterpret, revise our cognition of a piece of music. And that's something musicians use when creating music. And let me give you a short example of this revision process. Let's listen to the beginning of an old pop song by Rolling Stones. This is the introduction, and if we just listen to the introduction, it sounds like this. But when the band joins in, and now it sounds like this. Did you notice any difference? The thing is, when you let people judge what are the beats from the introduction alone, and when the band plays on, they place the beats differently. So here is a play with the expectations that it shift. Which makes it fun. So how can we actually model this diverse music? How does the algorithm, what are the challenges? And the basic challenge is that music is diverse. And just 3 short examples of this. Here is a typical rhythmical structure you can find in a lot of music.
Da da dee dum da da dee dum da 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 dee dum da da dee dum da da dee dum da dee dum da dee dum da dee dee dum da dum.
And can you find the beat? Well, what does the algorithm do? It interprets this as 7/8, which means we have a long first beat and a second and third beat, which is shorter. This is something that many people can experience from this piece of music as well. But music can also be like this.
Ba da 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 dum, ba da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, ba da 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 dum.
Here you could hear my very nice singing, and this was obviously very simple to clap along to. But here the tempo is accelerating, resulting as almost twice as short beats toward the end of the sequence. And this happens in a lot of music, not to the least traditional dance and ritual music, and children very often raise the tempo during the performance. Fluctuations of tempo is a very important feature of music performance, connected with expressivity. The resulting notation will not capture this change, since it's a matter of tempo, not of rhythm, which is displayed in the notation. But you can hear it. And here's a third example.
da da di dum di da dum da da di dum di da dum da da di dum di da dum da da di dum di dum dum.
And here the claps or the beats find its way occur between the onset of the sound sometimes, and this is called syncopation in musical terms, when beats are obscured and articulated by anticipation. And it's shown in score clouds notation by tied notes. So the algorithm has to, without knowing what is going to happen, to try to find these different versions of it. Beats are not always syncopated. So we have three different cases. The first having different length of beats but a steady tempo, the second a fluctuating tempo, the third a steady tempo but with events not always occurring on beats. So how can the score cloud algorithm capture these diverse structure? How can it predict how we're likely to perceive it? Firstly, there is circumstantial evidence to judge from. There is periodicity. In the case of the asymmetrical beat pattern, there is periodicity on a lower level and continuation of similar accentuation structure, repetition. While in the second case, the repetition relates to rhythm patterns, not to tempo. In the third case, there is enough periodical occurrences to let us detect a common pulse as a governing principle. Secondly, since the algorithm is based on a general model, it has low stylistical bias. It doesn't know any songs, almost any structure is likely to show. Thirdly, the model is sensitive to specifically musical dimensions such as structuring and music and pitch and time. So what are the limitations then to this model? It's the same as actually what is the benefits. It doesn't know any songs. So since it's based on general and circumstantial evidence, means it does not take listeners' bias into account, which means it needs enough information to retrieve the structure, while in a certain cultural context much less is needed to communicate a certain structure. The model is also handcrafted with rules, which there are many features not captured by the model that might influence the results. So why not use machine learning instead? In that way, you're not limited to structural features given by the model. Let the model learn from the data instead. Modern machine learning algorithms have proved to outperform knowledge-driven models for a lot of tasks. Yes, of course, you can use machine learning, and we could probably get an even more precise algorithm that way. And we do use a lot of machine learning in our company. However, learning from example, learning from data, which machine learning is essentially about, also implies challenges. If we consider the three different structures we've just listened to, what would be required for a data set to capture these structures? Another question would be how to obtain ground truth for the data. How would we know if the predictions by the model are good enough? And also, it relates to the question of what purpose we are developing the algorithm. Is it to make predictions that concur with the dominant interpretation of music structure in a given cultural context? In any case, I think I would argue that regardless of what method of computer modeling you choose, there is a lot to gain from knowledge about the nature of music, about different cultural expressions of music, and not to the least about the nature of the question you're trying to answer. If we evaluate our model by ground truth data, it's important to know the limitations of ground truth in music. But is it really a problem if we build a model of musical structure based on what is currently the most popular song streamed on Spotify? Well, today music technology is actually changing music more rapidly than perhaps ever before. As I mentioned before, there is the limitations of producing music actually changes the music we hear around us. And you can wonder, how does this affect people's music cognition? I see a very great hope in this conference and what you're doing here, that more of a human-friendly data modeling that allows for diversity can actually change the streamlining of human music we hear today. I believe this can be done by involving knowledge and perspectives from different fields. From my experience, the really interesting and valuable development happens when you combine different perspectives from different fields of knowledge. And for me, it has been invaluable to combine perspectives from music practice, musicology, psychology, and computer science. I believe with different perspectives, more interesting questions and music may arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sven, for an enlightening talk about a quite difficult subject, the truth of music. I'm looking at Slack to see if there are any questions. I see there is some typing going on. But before I can stick around, do you imagine allowing the user, or let's say ScoreCloud, to use other means to sort of input their truth, like tapping one's foot or something, to indicate what is the felt pulsation of something?
Yes, we are actually we've used that, and there is actually already such means of inputting music in ScoreCloud where you can tap along, like in sequencers, etc. Yeah. It's interesting that many users, they expect such a software to just give them their choice of results, and it can be very, very hard to understand that there might be another way to perceive what you don't. And it's also very interesting to work with that. But for many, it's very enlightening to use to see that, okay, this is something that where listeners have very different views on what is possible, how it should be.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a question from Iris. Thanks for the talk, she says. Could you please give references regarding the 3 tiers of grouping principles?
Yes, this is the reference. These grouping principles is I have published that in my thesis. It's my own compilation, you can say. So it's in Melody Beyond Notes. It's called this thesis. And it can be found on the internet from 2004, and they're compiled in this way. But it's generally a compilation of what is already published within psychology, music cognition, music psychology. It's not my own inventions, these, but it's my compilation of the principles.
Okay. Yeah, you've got a big thank you on the Slack channel. So that was obviously something people wanted to know. Another thing is it oriented towards singing, or are instrument input as well?
No, we have as much instrumental input. We have a fundamental. Now I just showed you the singing, the monophonic singing interpretation, because it's very open where we have this. You have a very open question. You don't have so much evidence in that sense. So it's but we have algorithms for polyphonic pitch detection, which use machine learning actually for finding these. So this, it's not like we only use these rule-based or cognitive modeling, but we use different things, and I think that's the interesting thing. We can see how much these data sets, even all, regardless really of what type of modeling you're working with, data sets and the reference data is very, very important, because it contains a lot of information and presuppositions of the nature of music, and I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have a question from Odette Pantal. So far, what kind of evidence do you have of musicians integrating ScoreCloud into their workflow?
Oh, we have a lot of people around the world. We have we. I would say we have. In general, we have many thousands of people actually using ScoreCloud and in their workflow, but even some people use it as a sketchbook, and then continue to develop the music in other notation software. Other people, it's used also in for instance, a lot actually in music education for kids to create and understand the relationship between music representation and music creation. So we have very nice examples from that it's used for creative music teaching, for instance, and where, because it doesn't give you the truth about what you do. It gives one interpretation, and it becomes like this possibility to interact with the machine interpretation of something. In this case, as an analysis, not as the creative, not creating something new, but the analysis level.
All right. Thank you very much. I think our time is up for this session. So again, a great thank you for a wonderful talk. And I'll see the rest of you listeners around for the next spotlight. Thank you.
Thank you.